Welcome back. We're going to read chapter 4 in Julius again. This one is called Julius Breaks Free. Mitch couldn't remember another time when he didn't want to go home. He usually loved his house, but tonight Julius wasn't with him. Maybe we'll have to stop taking him everywhere with us, Mom said into the darkness as she steered the car toward home. Maybe we're expecting too much of Julius. It's too late to think of that now, Mitch grunted. Just then, Mom turned into their driveway. Mitch climbed out of the car. No need to go in. He couldn't sleep a wink. Not with Julius lost somewhere in the black night. As Mitch plodded toward the house, he heard Cassie calling, "Hello, hello, oh, Mitch!" What was Cassie doing here after midnight? Maybe she'd seen Julius. He picked up his feet a little faster. As he ran up the stairs to the porch, he heard a whir of feathers and a big dark blob settled on his shoulder. "Hallelujah, Julius is mine," rang out into the night air. Then Julius crowded against Mitch's face. He whispered softly and tweaked Mitch's lips several times. Finally, Mitch came to himself. Julius was all right. "Hurry," Mommy called. He felt too excited to talk, but he had to tell her. "Julius is home. He's tired and wants to go to bed." Later, as Mitch fastened the wire that kept Julius in his cage, he couldn't help it. "Hallelujah, Julius is mine," he sang. He called Mr. Dewey to tell him the news. Then he and Mom both thanked God for bringing Julius home safely. Mr. Dewey took Mom out the next evening. Graham came over and stayed with Mitch. They fixed something to eat together, then Graham sat in the recliner. "I might as well make use of my time," she said, picking up her knitting needles. That reminded Mitch of Cassie's undone socks. "Can you knit socks?" he asked. She nodded. "Sure, it's easy, but you have to use 3 needles, sometimes 4. He told her about all the soft stuff that used to be Cassie's socks. "Maybe that's what you call unmaking a pair of socks," he said, and the stuff he pulled from those little socks went all over the place. "That bird's a lot of trouble," Graham said in a kind voice. Then she seemed to think hard for a moment. Finally, she nodded. "Dewey seems to have taken quite a shine to your mother." "Why do you say that, Graham?" Graham laughed as her fingers flew, making the needles clack. "Have you noticed how much time you and I are spending together lately? He's been taking her out several times a week." She rested her hands a moment and smiled. "I'm so glad for her," she said. "He's a fine man, and Faye's been alone for too many years." "Oh, Mitch! Oh, Mitch!" Mitch turned his eyes to the sound and discovered Julius completely wound up in Graham's ball of pink yarn. "Oh, Julius," Mitch returned, "I'm afraid you're in big trouble." He looked Julius over and saw dozens of strands of yarn around the bird's body. "Looks kind of pretty, doesn't it?" Graham asked quietly. All this time, Julius kept pleading, "Oh, Mitch! Oh, Mitch!" Mitch looked at the bright green and pink colors on his pet and started to laugh. "Graham, you're the greatest. I thought you'd have fried parrot for breakfast." Graham smiled. "I would if I ate meat. How do we get him out of that mess? Are you brave enough to pick him up and unwind him?" Mitch wasn't sure, but didn't want to admit it. How could a guy be afraid of his best friend? And Julius had never hurt him since the first night. As Mitch tried to think what to do, Julius stopped calling his name. Then he heard some loud noise, almost like scissors snipping. When he looked down, Julius was cutting the last few strands of yarn from his body with his sharp beak. A moment later, Julius stepped from the shimmering pile of hot pink stuff and hopped onto Mitch's shoulder. When Julius started tweaking Mitch's lips, Mitch knew his pet was ready for bed. When he returned from putting Julius to bed, Mitch looked again at the million circles of hot pink yarn on the carpet. "I guess you can't use that stuff now," he said. "Does it cost a lot of money?" Graham's needles stopped clacking. She smiled and shook her head. "I can handle the expense," she said softly. "That's a lot less of a problem than you have with that thing you just put to bed. But thanks for caring, Mitch." She knitted a few more rows, then looked up at Mitch. "I was impressed with how fast Julius cut that stuff off him. He was really wound up, and I don't believe it took him 15 seconds to free himself. Did you notice that, Mitch?" He nodded. "The vet told me he has a sharpener in his top bill that keeps the bottom one as sharp as a razor blade. I believe it, don't you?" "I do now." Her needles started clacking almost as fast as Julius had cut the yarn. Mitch picked up the short pieces of yarn, each about 18 inches long, and tossed them into the garbage. Then he jerked them out again. Maybe Julius would like them to play with. No telling what he'd do with them. Mitch hung them from the top of Julius's cage and went to bed. As he lay there, he remembered what Gram had been saying when Julius pulled his caper. She'd been saying that Mom and Mr. Dewey were spending a lot of time together. Exactly what Mitch had been trying not to think about. 2 days later, Cassie came home from school with Mitch. They finished their homework and played a game of checkers. After a long, hard game, Mitch had Cassie almost cornered. Just a few more moves and it would be all over. Mitch felt pretty good because Cassie usually won. He leaned on his elbows, thinking carefully before he made his move. He wanted to win as quickly and cleanly as possible. Then a whir, a flash of blue and the green feathers, and both checkers of Mitch's most important king took off in Julius's claws. "Bring those back here," he yelled. The bird landed on top of the drapes. "Bring them back, Julius," he pleaded. "I can't win without that king." Cassie doubled over with laughter. "Go, Julius," she called up to the bird. Then she met Mitch's eyes. "Now whose side is he supposed to be on anyway?" She laughed merrily. "I guess we don't have a winner. Tough, Mitch." Mitch didn't answer. Cassie got up from the table. "Is Gram coming over tonight?" she asked. "I don't know," Mitch grunted. What Cassie really meant was, "Is your mother going out with that guy again?" And he didn't want to think about it. She sat back down. "You know something's going on, don't you, Mitch?" "Like what?" "Like you may be about to have a stepfather." And that's the end of chapter 4.